Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this edition of our food safety conversation, where we're going to be talking about labeling fresh foods. India is still a dominantly fresh food market. The processed food industry hasn't caught up so much like in the West, and about 80 to 85% of the calories that are consumed are still coming from fresh food. It's also likely that we'll never see the kind of adoption that happened in the West because instant delivery has made fresh food available at the requirement, which is one of the problems that the processed food industry was trying to solve, which was basically having your food available whenever you wanted. And the convenience, of course, was there. So both of these now are tied into the delivery system. So we'll probably never see the kind of processed food adoption in India. So it becomes doubly more important that the nutritional aspect of this category of food should be addressed. Processing food is not being consumed does not mean people are not eating out. So they're not cooking everything at home. They're still eating out. So it's important that they know about what they are eating. Now, the Food Safety and Standards Labeling and Display Regulation 2020, in its Chapter 3, specifies the requirement for display of information in food service establishments. These are places where freshly prepared food is served. As per the regulation, the eligible food establishments, and there is a criteria, not every minor petty business has to do it, but there is a criteria. Based on that, the ones that are eligible must make nutritional information available starting from 1st of July, so that we're already 20 days into it. And for further details and all of that, you can, if you're on our YouTube channel, you can check out a short video which we have put up there, which talks about what are the requirements, what are the things that need to be displayed. And our YouTube channel is at Food Safety Works. But despite this becoming applicable, we have seen that this is not getting implemented universally. So we thought we should have this conversation talking about the concept to increase awareness, understand, and also discuss about what it will take, how useful it is for us to have this information on the display. We'll start with the introduction of the panelists. We have a fantastic panel today. So we'll first start with Mr. Ashim. Mr. Ashim Sanyal is the CEO of Voice, voluntary organization in interest of consumer education. He's a well-known personality in the domain, pushing for consumer agenda where industry is trying to muscle through their perspectives. He has a demonstrated history of working in non-profit organization and corporate management industry. So he was part of the corporate world before he decided to pick up a better cause. He has strong administrative and professional skills, having worked in the corporate for over 20 years in India and abroad. And he spent the last 15 years bringing a complete turnaround in Voice. And he has played, which is a major national level social organization fighting for the consumer rights. Of course, he has a postgraduate diploma from Indian Institute of Planning and Management, a lot of experience both dealing with uncertainties, I guess, as we may call it. So welcome, sir. Next, would like to introduce...
Thank you, Ramesh, for the warm introduction. Thank you.
Next, I'd like to introduce Prabhakar Rao. So Prabhakar is the founder of Melaange Foods. He has close to 28 years of experience in the fresh food business. Prior to starting Melaange, he was the managing partner at culinary development at Elior India, which is world's third largest food service company. He was also the founder of Megabyte, one of the largest industrial catering houses of its kind based out of Bangalore. I think they were serving over 40,000 meals every day, maybe higher. And I think they were instrumental in bringing the 5-star experience to the corporate cafeteria. Before joining or before starting Megabyte, he was the senior sous chef at Leela. He's been with the Carnival Cruises line. Taj Hotels, and all the big names in the food service. He has a bachelor's degree in hotel management from Institute of Hotel Management, Chennai. So welcome, Prabhakar.
Thank you, Ramesh.
And next on to Dr. Sanu. So he's been rushing through multiple meetings. Thank you for joining in. Next, we have Dr. Sanu Jacob. So he's the Director of Southern Region Office of FSSAI. While he may not be directly responsible for implementing some of the things, but I'm sure he's very, very familiar with what it takes to get this done. He has a vast experience in academia as well as in government service, which includes Export Inspection Council. That's where he was before his role at the FSSAI. Of course, he has a PhD in plant biology and crop production and a postgraduate diploma in law and practice. So he did do his thesis on consumer awareness creation. So I think he'll be a good person to talk about it with and side of FSSAI, the regulator, as well as having done some work on the consumer side as well. So welcome, Dr. Sanu. And And before we get started, so a little bit about myself. So I'm Ramesh, I run Food Safety Works. We are a food safety solutions company based out of Bangalore with offices in Mumbai and Delhi. We help our consumers or customers rather with implementing standards, regulatory compliance and productization services. That's what we do for business. So with that, we'll get started. So let's start with you, Dr. Sanu. What are your thoughts on the labeling requirements that we now have put on the food service industry? So pretty broad-ended question for you.
First of all, good morning and thank you for this opportunity for giving. In fact, it's a busy day for me. I just concluded my lecture at I am Bangalore and so I was thinking about a Superman job where the Superman has to be there this side and that side and has to manage. Well, coming to your question, Rameshji, like FSSAI has notified the menu labeling regulations. That is both FSSR, that is packaging and labeling, as well as labeling and display regulation. And as per this regulation, any food service establishment which falls under the purview of this regulation as specified, they are supposed to declare the calorific value or the allergen which is intrinsic to certain foods like your wheat pertaining to gluten or shrimp or peanut. There are different allergen that comes from the food. Even veg and non-veg logo on the menu card or on the display board, that is again a must. And this actually is required to give, sensitize the consumer to make choices. And it provides ample nutritional information and any other declaration that may be associated with the food, like MSG or sterols, etc., which might not be useful or good for a segment of population. So all those things are part and parcel of the labeling and display. And that is the reason these regulations are needed and should be implemented by the food service industry.
Fantastic. I think that's a good baseline to start with. So we did, like Dr. Sanu mentioned, there is quite a detailed list of things that need to be put together. And you can look at the regulation itself, or you can visit the website of the FSSAI and they will tell you what are the things. They also have an FAQ, a sample document which talks about how it can be displayed, what should be displayed. So I think from the regulator perspective, they've kind of tried to help all the businesses understand this better. So I think we'd all encourage everyone to go look at that, and if there are any questions, always come back and answer those. Now, coming on to you, Mr. Prabhakar, as someone who understands this industry deeply, what do you think are the challenges in implementing this? So the regulator has said that you have to do this, but you are the ones who are responsible for doing it. What do you see as the major challenges?
Good morning to all. Yeah, thank you, Ramesh, for inviting me for this. So the question which is there is basically very tough question, especially when you talk about Indian situation, because for here we always have this attitude saying that it's chalta hai, correct? So getting to transfer the knowledge is the biggest challenge which I see, because I'm talking it from a operator perspective, because the law has been done by the government of India, and somebody is to be followed. So in between this, we just form the operator. So typically what we see is that the knowledge transfer doesn't happen in the proper way. And obviously constraints are there as far as operations are concerned, saying that infrastructure sometimes doesn't allow you, but we are forced to deliver something which is there. So that way, if you look at it, I would say that the challenge which is there is knowledge transfer. And obviously the second biggest challenge I see is that how much of a vigilance which we have in order to check all this process and procedures have been followed by every individual who's there. Because the number of people we have as far as this checking thing is concerned, not too many. So invariably we just say, okay, if it happens, it happens. At that time we will see. But we don't put that as a process and say that, let me just start from the day one itself, saying that, let's start following this as a process and procedure which has to be there. So probably, if you start increasing the vigilance part of it, there can be a good, throughput when it comes to saying whether everybody is following it or not. And the third is basically empowering regulatory bodies to be making anybody who misuses this to be punishable then and there. I know that it is already there, but it has not been conducted in a very religious manner. Probably if you say that this is going to be there, this is not acceptable, and we just stop it there, and it becomes a news. People come to understand that this is something which has gone out of bound, and people are putting other people, these operators putting us in risk. So probably it can get addressed in a very larger manner. So the regulation part of it, I think implementing will be knowledge transfer. First and foremost thing is the knowledge transfer about why it is happening, what is the requirement, and how it has to be done. The second thing is that how do we start, manning this and seeing that this works properly across. And almost another thing which we have is the division of our thing where we have the rural and the urban. Maybe the rural is not catching up with the urban as much as what we wanted, because urban is well traveled. So urban kind of differentiates it in a very different way while accepting it. And then our rural always has an excuse saying that, okay, fine, yeah, we are on the way to urban, so let us take our own time. That is where I see as a challenge for implementing this. And I know that is the process which is going to take time, but it will happen, but in a very slow paced manner.
Thank you. Fantastic point. I think slow pace is what we want to accelerate. And that's what we are doing this webinar for. So part of the knowledge transfer, hopefully there are people listening in, and then once it is available for future, it will continue to be followed through and sort of revisited, and people will know better. So yeah, I think those are the challenges. I guess it is a vast industry. It is a fragmented industry. The spectrum of food businesses is very huge, right from very, very small food businesses to very, very large ones, like the ones that you were part of, like Elior, where it is a lot more organized. So I guess all of these are challenges that slow down the process, and will probably slowly improve on that. Now, coming to you, Mr. Sanyal, so you were already fighting the battles for FOP labeling on the package. So that was one thing. And then that was at least a lot more organized. There were industry bodies, and there were people who you could talk to, or at least convince them, or there's a forum for convincing them, right? If I could say. Whereas this one is, like I said, a very, very fragmented part of the system, not very organized. Who do you talk to? Who do you catch hold of? So how do you think we would ever get to compliance on this?
Thank you, Ramesh, for the invitation first. And it's a pleasure being on this webinar. The topic is very warm, if I may call it, because there are TV interviews and there are newspaper clippings. In fact, everybody seems to be rather excited to hear it, as it is for any regulation act or that comes in. India is famous for bringing out hordes of acts, regulations, and other notifications, in fact. And I completely agree with Mr. Prabhakar when he says the implementation is always shoddy. But overall, from a consumer perspective, I would say that, these are welcome signs of trying to get consumers' maturity tested, in fact, in terms of food, nutrition, and health. I think that is the key mission for Eat Right India, and that is what the Prime Minister, Honorable Prime Minister, said in his Mann Ki Baat a number of times, that India must eat right. Question is, what is eating right was not known a couple of decades back. That time it was filling your tummy somehow and managing to survive. Now we have come to a stage where since the last 1 decade, we are talking about nutritious food. Because the humble saying is basically a food that is not nutritious is not a food at all. So with this particular saying, I think all these small regulations and their implementation will act a long way in terms of building up consumer knowledge. What is lacking today is consumers' knowledge on these things, in fact. So if a consumer, as an example, goes to a very large, well-known place, the assumption is the food being served is fantastic, tasty, nutritious, healthy. That's an assumption. If he goes to a small dhaba or a small restaurant where there's a lot of crowd and he doubts it, in fact, how do you clarify these doubts in terms of what he requires or what his family requires is critical. Now, this particular regulation, I'm quite sure, like FSSAI normally does, there has been a few stakeholder meetings in which consultation did take place, and obviously any regulation that comes out is after stakeholder consultation. So that would have happened. That is a must. So, and for us as consumer organizations, it is conveying a message to consumers that the regulator is acting as per the consumer requirement in terms of satisfying his need for nutritious diets. Now, when I, as a consumer, talk about WHO or NIN 2000 kilocalories per day, I mean, okay, I seem to be knowledgeable, in fact. But then, and obviously it has to be plus for growing up children, it has to be minus for aged and disabled people. That fact is well known. Now, how many consumers know that 2000 kilocalories is required per day in the 4 meals that we take normally, in fact, including 2 snacks and 2 full meals? These are information that can only be imparted through consumer education. Now, obviously, there is a regulation now in place where we were talking about restaurants and food joints beyond a certain threshold levels following these particular. This is something which will add on to the value of the restaurant. And that is what my point is. In fact, all these regulations and their mandating and their basically, adhering by the FBOs requires a little diligence, a little painful exercise, but then ultimately they add value to the restaurant. So it's a win-win situation, both for the consumers who comes to know about how many calories he's eating per day in terms of 4 dishes that he has ordered and divided into 4 in terms of his family members. So per person gets so much. I mean, I'm not quite sure that a consumer is not going to do that kind of a calculation, but then overall he will come to know that whether he's exceeding his limits or not in terms of the calories that he or his family requires. Having said that, this regulation is meant for open market. It's not for packaged foods, it's for open market. And the display, it is similar to the display that the sweet meat shops were supposed to do, a display of best before use of sweets. in their shops. Now, many shops that I visit basically have done away with that individual labeling, in fact, and done away with a large poster that right at the entrance. The sweets are supposed to be refrigerated and the sweets are supposed to be consumed within 12 hours. Finish. So there is a tendency of shortcut of every regulation. This might happen here also. But then overall, as consumer organization, we welcome this move.
Thank you, sir. Fantastic. I think it's kind of surprising. I think we all are in the industry and we assume how it is very, very common knowledge that 2000 kilocalories is something that everybody understands. But I'm sure if you post this message on your family WhatsApp group, you will realize, and which all of us have one. So if you ask the question, I'm sure you will get quite a few queries about what is a kilocalorie and what is this 2000. So I think although we may assume that that is a ubiquitous knowledge, it's probably not. And I think at least this will be a good start for people to understand saying what is 2000 and why is it 2000 and things like that. So on the food they are ordering as well as what they are making at home, I'm sure it will help raise the awareness on that. So I think all in all a good start. So coming back to you, Dr. Sanu, and I'll ask you some nitty-gritty questions and for the qualification criteria. So, and we talked about how FBOs like to take shortcuts and all that. So I'd like to pick on one of them. So the regulation says that if you have a hotel, restaurant, clubs, canteens, cloud kitchens, dhaba, etc., and if you have more than 10 outlets, then it is mandatory for you to have this labeling display put in place. Now, oftentimes, how do you define this 10 outlets? Is it a brand? Is it a license? Because they're all at different locations. If it's a central license, yes. So it talks about if it's a central license, then fantastic, you have to have it done. But if it's a state license, we have this tendency to, like, let's say if it's a franchisee model, where, and this is a question we get all the time, saying it's a franchising model, right? So license is not in my name. I'm only giving him some ingredient and he's selling it under my brand. Now, how does this number 10 work out? And what if it is just a registration, right? So they will say, okay, each franchisee is really small and I will not even take a license. I will just do registration. Then what do you do? So you have kind of a rule of thumb or something you want to put on that?
Thanks, Ramesh. Quite an interesting question. In fact, the registration and licensing regulation clearly states the benchmark. Like for a registration, if your turnover is from 1 rupee till 12 lakhs, you need a registration that can be done by a state authority, and a license. For a state license, it should be over 12 lakhs till 20 crore, and over 20 crore is the central license. So that is a thumb rule which FSSAI has for all kinds of food business operation. Generally, in the central license, all this 5-star category hotel, they fall under the central license, while rest of the remaining, below 5-star are falling under the state government purview. Now, in your question, you had asked if it is a 10 outlets thing and it is managed by one single person. Yes, they do require a license or a registration. That is very clear. Any food business operator who is handling the food is supposed to have a registration or a license. So that is really must. And in terms of, franchise model, the owner of the franchisee, if he is a centrally licensed, shall fall under this particular ambit. He also required to have the license or the registration. And if the franchise and the state license, now there can be two models. One can be state franchisee or a central franchisee. Now, I'm talking about the state franchisee where there are more than 10 outlets, and they too also have to have, they will also fall under this regulation. There is only one exception where the franchisees of the same brand, which is held by another party or organization in another state, and that has less than 10 outlets, then they can be made some they can be given a kind of an exception. But otherwise, whoever, whether it is 10 or more, they are bound to have the registration and licensing.
Thank you for that clarification. And I think, like Mr. Sanyal said, it's always better to kind of do it anyway, because it is something that kind of adds value to your restaurant, your outlet. So you will be seen as a better business. So while I know we try to work around and cut corners, I think the message would be to see if you are anywhere falling close, it's probably better to just do it rather than kind of avoid it by doing this technicalities and workarounds and all of that. So the question is again related to this outlet scheme and all of that. So now this one is for Prabhakar. So sometimes now we say state license, and the regulation broadly talks about the central license and the state license and the number of outlets. Now, when we're talking about industrial kitchens, they may be just one single license, but they probably serve a lot more food than what your 10 franchisees will serve, right? So let's say even if you do 150, 200 orders a day, you're talking about 2,000 orders, whereas a catering company, which a simple catering company, industrial, not very simple, but yeah, an industrial catering company would easily serve 1,500 to 2,000. The one that you worked at last was serving 40,000. So now, what do you think should be the way to kind of assess this, right? So clearly, in the current regulation, you can get away with that, saying, okay, I'm a state license holder and I have only one catering unit, right? So, and if you have less than 30 days, then yeah, so if you fall under catering unit, there's another criteria. But broadly, what are your thoughts on putting this out on the catering units as well?
In my opinion, basically, if it is one outlet or 10 outlets or 100 outlets, it is something which we are talking, which is relative to health and safety. Irrespective of 1 or 10, I think it is supposed to be followed, as a spreadsheet. So that way, if you look at it, anybody for that matter, even a smallest unit which is actually catering to anybody, even a roadside vendor or somebody for that matter, should be able to display this, and it should become mandatory. I think once it gets mandatory, then people will start taking this very seriously, saying that yes, this is required and this is something. Now we always give this leverage where we say, okay, fine, if you are one outlet or two outlet, people find reasons to come into that gamut, saying that okay, fine, I can get away with this. The thing is that if you have one restaurant, if you have one outlet, if you have one catering unit, irrespective of whatever it is, when you're coming to a food service industry where you're serving food, fresh food to anybody for that matter, it becomes mandatory for you to display this. And it becomes very, very important for everybody to follow. And it is not something which, you can get away with. So I would say that, this thing which is there as a rule probably has not been understood clearly. And it's for me basically not been understood clearly that we can always get away from it. See, because we're all very smart in saying that, how can we get away from what is there? We find always reasons to get away from it rather than trying to follow it, because when you start following it, there is a cost for it, and we need to, take up that cost. So that's the reason that we say we will have to actually go out of this. The reason why I'm saying cost, because the minute you have to put those labeling, put the calories and things like that, you need to have some.
I think Prabhakar's link is gone. Can the others hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so it looks like Prabhakar's link has some issue. Let's see if he comes back. Okay, so I think we'll continue and then we'll come back to him once his link comes back. So, yeah, so I think he's gone because his link went down. So coming to you, Mr. Sanyal, picking up from where we said, we started with consumer education part of it, and consumer has to understand. And my question on that was, like, let's say if I'm headed to a restaurant, then I have already made the decision that I will eat there, right? So so do you think really people would care about this? Or do you think the information will change anything in their practice? What kind of timelines are we looking at?
So the question here is, Ramesh, that this regulation doesn't really hit out at consumers going to a particular restaurant or a joint for eating. That choice is always with the consumer. He or she can always walk into any restaurant that is preferred by him or by his children or by his family. The question is, after the walk-in, what does he choose? This regulation is basically important for. When he chooses something which is basically meeting the calorific values of the food intake, that is a critical decision, which means the menu card is critical for his choice of food. He may have come from home deciding on choosing mutton biryani, for all you know. But then looking at the calories based on his, say, lunch or tea that he had along with his family, he may decide to not to have that because of the high calorie value that the dish contains, and he might decide to have something lighter. So this is something that you're making the consumer a stakeholder for understanding about his health requirement. I'm talking about typically giving examples. For example, if somebody is diabetic, he will try to avoid sweet as far as possible, or his family will persuade him not to have sweets. It's similar kind of a decision that the family takes based on the information available on the menu card as well as on the platter that is being served. Now, this has got so much of calories in it, and this is if suppose you put an slash and say 2000, for example, I mean, that will make things very easy for the consumer to understand. Now, this is not an easy job. In FOPL, you were talking about a fight in FOPL. Now, that is also not an easy job either for implementation or, for the consumer's understanding. It's equally difficult because of simple reason that understanding labels is something that the consumer is very poor at. In fact, in our study with Consumer International London, in fact, we found even in developed nations, in fact, more than 80% people don't understand the labels. Similarly, here also, what we're talking about is label only. Now, understanding label will take a lot of exercise in terms of IEC material for consumers, in terms of FSSAI making a concerted effort, maybe with the Consumer Affairs Ministry under the Jago program, in making consumer understand what is good for his health, which is bad for his health. Now, this regulation doesn't make the job easy for either the FBOs or, for that matter, the FSOs. We have the number of FBOs and versus the number of FSOs is a mismatch completely. So its implementation is anyway going to be a long haul. For consumers in between, probably the consumers will determine which restaurant or which food joint is good for his or her or their requirement based on this one guidance tool, which is something which tells him about the calories that he's eating. And let me tell you, one thing is sure. The consumer knows one word, and that is calories, because the doctors have told them many times, in fact. You know, so much of calories, so much of calories. So the word calories have been repeated. So once that gets repeated at the eating joint on his table, he suddenly realizes that isko bhi dekhna hai. This calorie is something important for me. So I think it's again a situation where the understanding of the entire purpose has to be made very clear by FSSAI. It has to be made very clear by other sources. And of course, consumer organizations have a special role ever since it was implemented. In fact, we have been playing a major role in terms of consumer awareness, in terms of circulating what is it with a small note, telling consumer organization to spread this particular news, in fact, report back who is not following this. So this is a long haul. All regulations are long haul in any case, in fact, right? And I will touch upon the last point, which is mandatory versus voluntary, which Mr. Prabhakar does touch upon. Anything voluntary is, in my opinion, and I use a blatant word, it's useless. It has to be mandatory so that the regulator has a control, the FSOs have a control, the state has a control, and the consumer has a right to complain. It's a voluntary, nobody has any control. It's just another regulation. So I think mandatory is something which is important out of the all requirements.
Fair point. I think mandatory it is. So at least this one is mandatory. So we really need not to worry about it. So Prabhakar, before you got disconnected, you were talking about something. I wasn't sure if you completed that or you want to kind of complete that thought of yours.
You're muted, Prabhakar.
Yeah, I do not know where I actually dropped, so I'm not able to carry from there. But yes, so I was just talking about the same thing. Like until unless it becomes very, very mandatory, people will start trying it as an option which is always available, and then working in different environments, because I worked in the other ships and things like that. So where I always found that uniqueness, where you say that the minute it becomes very, very strict and mandatory that you need to keep this at this temperature, this should be served at this temperature, this should be kept in this temperature. If it is out of that temperature, it has to go into this. Nobody wants to follow. They see you have people who come as inspectors over there. They do a ransack of the whole place and say, okay, this is not right, that is not right, you get penalized for that straight away. So everybody who was working in the system gets little, worried about it, saying that, I should not be in the news because of wrongdoing. So until unless we don't get the fear into people, people will take this as an advantage and start exploring opportunities to come out of it.
Very nice. It's encouraging to see food business operators talk like that, right? And I would particularly want to pick on very, very mandatory. So I think this is a very, very Indian term as well, saying we have mandatory, and then we have very mandatory, and then we really need to make it very, very mandatory so that everybody is actually doing it. So with that, coming back to you, Dr. Sanu, so the usual complaint with food business operators, it is like, okay, the processing food industry gets it easy. They have like 5 products, which is like 5 kinds of chips that they make, and that's all that they make, with such a big turnover and all that. We are a small restaurant, but even if it's a small restaurant or a hotel, we have 200 recipes. Our recipes are not standardized, right? So how do we do nutritional calculation? The other thing is that now labeling regulation says you have to put saturated fat and trans fat, and even we face the challenge saying our NIN models don't give you saturated and trans fat numbers in the tables. So if you're doing manual calculation, that doesn't work out. There is the cost of testing it in lab, which is again runs into quite a high thousand, somewhere from 8 to 10,000 per recipe. So all of this kind of discouraging, or let's say encouraging people to move towards not implementing it. We've had a lot of conversations with food businesses who come and then they say, I need to be compliant. And when they look at the bill and they're like, okay, let me think about it. And that's been going on for 6 months. So what do you have to say on that?
Rameshji, what my previous speaker Ashimji had said, it's a one-time pain, but again, one-time pain will definitely give you gain lifetime. So what I would say is, this is a must. Nutritional information is a must. I recollect or remember the day when I was working in Canada. My colleague, next to my desk, whenever he used to eat his food or anything, especially pre-packed food, he will always, glue upon the calories, and he will take as such, and then he used to go for gym to work out, and then again he will come and he will say that I worked out so much and I lost it so much of calorie, and for that I'm compensating with the calories. So he used to make his body balanced and was pretty active. Now, this kind of thing, the Indian government also wants people of India to be healthy. And for that matter, such regulation, once they are coming into picture or enforced, this is going to gain at large at one point of time. So complaining that there are 200 recipes, how I would be calculating. It's a very, when you go to the Indian food composition table, which is released by NIN, they have clearly, mentioned the nutritional information and calorific value of most of the Indian food product. And they can also analyze in the lab, but, we are not asking them to analyze any in the lab. There is always a margin, plus minus 10% is always being given. What we insist is that they can, work out on the table, which is very simple. A carbohydrate, 1 gram delivers 4 kilocalories. Protein, it's in the same way. Fat, it gives 9 kilocalorie. If it is an alcoholic drink, it is 7 kilocalories. So, when you look into those things, it's a simple mathematics that need to be applied one time, and we are not insisting that it has to be very specific to the point. No, this is, this helps in making consumer a better choice. My parents, probably when I speak to them of 2000 kilocalorie is recommended, they may not be knowing. So education, through consumer voice, through consumer organization, through FSSAI, it's everyone's responsibility. And for that reason, they have to do this exercise. And every change, will bring resistance and challenges. But at the end, once we transit this and this initial difficulties, if can be sorted out at the first by the restaurant, then and giving the right information to the consumer to make their better choice, that will be the most helpful way to serve the society. I think that's my point.
Great. So I think we have to look at it as a greater good that we need to be all part of. And if I may kind of add, saying standardizing, for those who say that I don't have standard recipes, I would say that standardizing your recipe is a good thing, not just from the calorie perspective, but also from your cost perspective. So you really understand where your money is going and what are you using and how are you kind of doing it. Also from the consumer taste point of view. So the consumer gets a more consistent taste, which you can build over a period of time. So people will come back to you for that. So the calories is just a follow on to that. So there is recipe which will give you more consistent costs, more consistent tastes, and more consistent calorie. And like you said, it's a one-time activity, one-time pain for a long-term gain and for the greater good of the society. So I guess we should all bite the bullet. Coming on to you, Prabhakar, so two things for you. So this question is asking a chef. Now, we said you standardize your recipe, right? So then what are chefs for, right? We can do factory food. Why do we need chefs and master chefs to improvise? So that is one. And the other one is, I think, around the whole idea of accuracy and cooking and denaturization of food and all of that. So I know we've discussed concerns on that. So do you think putting restrictions like this kind of reduces the chef's capability to improvise, and also that the nutrition value really is not very accurate, but we simply put something and get away with it?
I think most of the organizations now, be it restaurants or hotels, and especially with the chefs itself, I think everybody is moving into standardization to a very large extent. I don't think that era of chefs who were having the secret powders in their pockets and putting it in the last minute to make that enhancement is gone. I think everything is available now, and obviously, this is also an era where people are dealing with the technology as the most most important thing in their business, correct? And when you want to have the same product being served in Gurgaon or in Chennai or in Bangalore, I think you need to have standardized recipe, because people talk about that standardization only. So standardization plays an important role once we have. And when you come to nutritional value of a standardized recipe, is a place where we will have a slight challenge because of the raw material which we get. So that raw material which we get is not standard for a very large extent. So if you have to look at it, the quality of the vegetables which we have when it comes from a hydroponic farm or from a organic farm, basically will be different from each other. So the components of the nutritional value might change a little bit as far as standardization is concerned. But I think there is a lot of people who have changed to standardized recipes, because now most of the restaurants don't want to be dependent on chefs. They want to be dependent on the process.
So, if I may say, you are talking against your profession here, saying they don't want to depend on chefs.
No, it's not about chefs. I think the evolvement, how did the food industry evolve? Now today we are not just looking at a dal makhani and a pulao, correct? We are talking about enchiladas. We're talking about pizzas of different regions, which is going to be there. So the chef has to evolve out of his comforts in order to make things better and make more choices for people. So I don't think that the chef will stop here because my dal makhani recipe is standardized. So I will always look at what are my opportunities in order to see that what can be the next one where people can get enticed.
Fantastic. That's a great point. I think you'd rather use your skills in making something nice and better rather than just keep repeating the same thing over and over again. So yeah, I think it also frees up the chef.
Until unless you don't invent, you will not be able to be in the market for a long time. I think so. Until unless you don't innovate, you're gone. Maybe the best of the best also will have to innovate. Correct?
Right. So hopefully a lot of chefs are listening to you, and we'll do this check on whether they agree with you or not at a more chef forum. Now. So I'll play a little bit of a devil's advocate here and come back to Mr. Sanyal. So the regulation says that the accuracy for the fresh food business has been put to 25%, right? So you're allowed to do 25% variation in that. So which means plus or minus 25. So which is really half of it. So you could move this way 25, that way 25. So like 1.5x, quite a huge margin that has given. Now, if I'm a business owner and if I just like flip a coin and put a number and put it out there, right? So if I go to somebody and say, hey, forget the recipe, dal makhani is so much, right? And I put it up there, will there be any way to verify that? As in, do you think that number is accurate? Should we try to do anything about it from the consumer point of view or from the regulator point of view?
See, this regulation is a holistic approach. I'll put it this way. This is a holistic approach towards achieving a larger goal. very obviously, as a consumer organization, I would be totally dissatisfied with the 25% margin plus minus given to for any recipe. But when we started off with banning of trans fats, we started from nowhere, brought it down to 20%. That 20% came down further to 10%. That 10% came down to 5% to 3% to 2%. So there is a staggered approach, which is a better approach. And always in FOPL also we say the same thing, that there has to be a staggered approach because of simple reason. Nobody can make a perfect recipe or perfect standard overnight and call out for a gold medal for that. It's impossible to do that. We know with food. It is important that they follow the current recipe that they're making in terms of the variation that they have, make a standard out of that particular recipe and come out with their calorific value calculation. This is all that is required, and this is all specified in NIN by NIN. So it is there in the rule book, in fact. Now, how far is the deviation going to be? I mean, you forget those days where, somebody used to put a pinch of salt, or put a hand in the another, bucket and put some haldi and something. Those days are gone. In fact, people are, after all, using spoons, measuring tools to put in their spices, whatever they are, put in the oils. So there is a standard they're following. Only thing, that standard probably needs a revisit. Now that revisit basically is important to adhere to their own calculation, that what will the customer like? Will the customer like a very, very tasty food with a very high calorific value? Or will a customer then prefer a diet kind of a dietary kind of an approach where he requires low calorific value? Nobody here in this regulation is talking about stopping high calorie food. We are all talking about moderating the entire process so that the customer chooses the best option in either of his 4 meals. So it is important for us to therefore understand that this regulation has begun with a holistic approach, with a view to help the chefs and the restaurants and the chains, in fact, to actually attain certain level of standard before consumer organizations like us push FSSAI, say what the hell is this? 25% not acceptable. We are still in a nascent stage. As consumer organizations, we understand that, because it is not only that the restaurant provides you with a value for food in terms of the calories and other nutrients, it is also that the consumer understands. So we know that we are going to take a couple of years to actually pass on this message to consumers and consumers to understand that. So that period is good enough for anybody to make experiment and standardize, especially for franchises and other things. Now, I for one know for sure that I choose a franchisee of a South Indian meal, which is based out of Tamil Nadu in Delhi, because they have the same taste. How do they manage? So these questions are self-answering questions. Nobody has to guide you on that. So I have this limited point that we are starting up with a high threshold value in terms of plus minus percentage, but it is the consumer organizations and the consumer's pressure which is going to basically determine 2 things. One, that the restaurants give them value for money, as we call it, in terms of food that is basically suitable to the health. Second is the organization, civil society organization, pushing FSSAI. Now that you're here for 2 years, let's push it down to 10%. So 2 things possibly will happen and should be happening.
Great. So I think if I have that one big takeaway is that let's at least begin. And I think let's make an honest attempt and let's see how we can improve upon that. So I think that would be the message to go by. And I hope everybody will go with that message. And as we come to the last round of questions, I just want to request audience who's tuned in through our Academy portal or through the YouTube. So if you have any specific questions that need answered for any specific panelists, please post them on the chat, and then we will try to hand it over to the panelists and ask them that questions on your behalf. So please, you can start posting questions. Now coming back to you, Dr. Sanu, the question is around, I think a little bit of introduction happened in Mr. Sanyal's topic is about the diversity. So India has a fairly diverse kind of food, lifestyle, I would say, language. Now, the regulation is mostly talking about putting it on, so it doesn't actually talk about putting regionalization or local language. Uh, and I know this is a specific challenge. So is this information that we are trying to disseminate will get disseminated enough for people to kind of understand this?
I think yes, over the years or over the months, yes, that is through constant education. We should disseminate. In fact, FSSAI time and again through various training programs, they are doing it. And apart from that, we also have, even at the regional center, we do hold time to time some kind of, imparting knowledge, like for the 5-star, they are, mandatory. They have to fulfill the menu labeling regulation, which was effective from 1st of July. So we have, given them the improvement notice and so on. And if, still they are not coming forward, then we have to go with the penal actions. So this is what, so the message, to the FBO is going on, even in their vernacular regional language. Whenever we speak in South, we tend to speak in their local language to give more, it gives a closer touching. Now, even if you see the Eat Right India campaign, which we are doing it in every nook and corner of our country, it is all done in the local language. The standees and the informations, the leaflets are coming in the local language. So definitely the information is going down well to the people of India, to the FBOs in particular, and they need to adopt. So, it's everyone's responsibility, not the FSSAI, but everyone has to come forward, as our Honorable Prime Minister has again and again said, "Sabka Saath, Sabka Prayas, and Tab Hoga Sabka Vikas." So we have to follow, that kind of approach time and again, so that at one point of time, India will have, productive generation, because when we see, there are silent killers like obesity, diabetes, malnutrition, all such things are happening. And for that reason, the Eat Right India movement gained momentum a few years back. And now we have reached to the school level. We are educating, even the primary schools, the colleges. In fact, this morning in IIM Bangalore, when I was giving my talk, and my last slide, focused on Eat Right activities, why they can't take up. So such kind of knowledge we are, sharing, or we are transferring to the common man. And we hope that the coming, days will be good. Eat right, emphasize on eat healthy, hygiene, sanitation, eat safe, something devoid of adulteration or some safety parameters like pesticides or heavy metals or antibiotics. If those things can be curtailed right at the farm level. So it's a, holistic approach, not only FSSAI, the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Food Processing, the Consumer Society, the R&D, Research and Development Organizations, so universities. So everyone has to come together, sabka saath, that approach has to be there, then definitely, we will have a very productive population, and we will have a good advantage with respect to, a good life and a healthy population.
Fantastic, very well put. I think that also means it's a shout out to all the people who've tuned in. You care enough to be here with us for this session, so please do spread the word, and in whatever language, in whatever form, in whatever way you can, to let people know that this is something that needs to be done and this needs to be achieved. Continuing with this,
I will, sorry to interrupt, I will also add one more point. We also encourage to eat sustainable, like diversity. Try to eat the local food of your place rather than, going with, maybe once in a while, it's okay, but whatever is locally grown. So that also encourage the farmer who is producing it. And at the same time, that is nutritious. Millets can be a one choice. So there are alternatives which the consumer can try out, and also save the food. This is again one, we have a regulation, save and share food. So surplus food, whatever this thing is there, try to share it, or at least don't make wastage of food in your plate. So this also, FSSAI time and again has advocated through the Eat Right India campaign. Thank you.
I think Prabhakar particularly likes local food. So when you said local, I saw him all smile. And I think that's an important part for Eat Right as well, eating more sustainable, eating more local. And I'm sure the label would kind of start highlighting and saying the whole foods probably would anyway give you better numbers than highly processed foods. So I wouldn't say they're bad, they're great, but at least the balance that Mr. Sanyal was talking about. So it will make the consumer aware of what choices that they are making. Now on to the culture that we have. So we all know, I think Prabhakar and myself have spent a little bit time on corporate cafeterias, and we've seen all the healthy counters in the corporations go bust right, most of the time. So it's like the managers, the facility managers and cafe managers are saying, we need to provide healthy options. We need to provide healthy options for employees. But what sells is chola bhatura at the end of the day. So what do we do on how can we make some changes to our culture? So how would we improve our food cultures to say that people start choosing healthier foods? Prabhakar?
I think I totally agree with Mr. Sanu, who mentioned about sustainability of agriculture products which are used in your cuisines every now and then. And I think there is a lot of initiative which has been taken by a lot of corporates, for that matter, in order to push healthy food by giving a subsidy to healthy food, which is going to be there. And we also see a lot of people have taken that also. So I would say that yes, healthy should not be forced on you. It should not be something which has to be forced on you. It should be of a choice that you should take up healthy for your betterment. And it should not be that, it is a subsidized meat, so I'm getting benefit of that, so I should take that. No, that should not be the way it should be, correct? It should be something which I am going to be healthy. My lifespan is going to increase. My number of days I'm adding on by just having this food. So if you have that kind of a thought process, probably it can work wonders. And that is where I think the most important thing, especially in the corporate, is that how we transfer this knowledge to people who always think that, I am not getting what I want, rather than saying that this is what you have and this is going to provide you the kind of nutrition which you require. Is there somebody who is communicating this? I don't think that is happening. End of the day, we are just fighting, saying that the person is providing at this one, this person is providing this one, but we are not talking about what is nutritionist and what is something which is supposed to be had by you. So this effort, if it has been put across, and make it like, very exciting for people to be a part and parcel of it, it makes sense. And I'm definitely in line with this sustainability thing. And if you have to say, okay, this item which has been grown or made today, Like, for example, I say, okay, a palak khichdi has been made today, and I say, this is healthy. This palak which is there is grown 40 kilometers away from here. This is the farmer's name which is there. I just put this. And I promote this as a person who wants to encourage healthy eating, correct? And I'm also seeing that the person is also saying that, okay, fine, boss, this is something which has been made here. We are making it and giving it to you. Please promote it. And I think this should be the way we should be then. But as India, a lot of people are traveling, so they always want to see what is there in the West to be there on the table on their plate. Be it the quinoa, be it the zucchini, be it the broccolis of the world. Everybody wants to have that in the plate rather than what is there around you. So I think we just need to open up our eyes and see what is next to you and start adding those into the menus. Make it healthy. Whenever we say healthy, we always switch over to something like a sandwich or something like that. Why not to have a millet, a kanji or something like that, which is really good and it is filling. So there has to be an action which has to be taken in order to make it healthy. And I know, as Mr. Ramesh said, the minute you put chole bhature, you put puri bhaji, that is the most favorite thing, and that is the one which gets sold out first. So when we talk about healthy, we are not living to what we talk. So, but at the same time, there's a business we need to still provide that. So that's where the relationship doesn't match. But yes, I'm in line with what we think about healthiness. There has to be a continuous knowledge transfer which has to happen in order to make people realize that what is the healthy food, or what should be had in order to make it more promising. And I can give you examples. Whenever a gym gets opened in a corporate, the very next day, the omelette counter just goes bizarre because the gym instructor told person saying that you need to have 16 egg whites for your breakfast to have your protein. Suddenly it goes up. So when there can be a transformation of that nature which can come in, we can also look at it holistically of saying that how we can change the eating habits of people while they are to more towards the healthier side.
Right. So this gives newer ideas of labeling. So we should probably add food miles on the label as well, just to make sure that people understand how far the food is coming from, and they can make more sustainable choices. I'm sure everybody is yelling at me for giving such more work to everyone. Coming back to you, Mr. Sanyal. So there is the calorie and nutrition value and all of that. So I just wanted to kind of compare it with the front of the pack labeling, which is being done for the packaged food. Just contrasting between fresh food and packaged food, do you think putting something like that instead of the current form will communicate to the customer better, or will jive with better with the consumer?
So Ramesh, you're actually, let me counter you first by saying chole bhature and samosa and all are all not good for health. As a consumer, I must say every food has got a positive side. We did, if a chole bhature is not refried in overcooked oil, in fact, it is scanned properly in terms of, usko chan ke phir aapko plate pe denge jisme oil kam ho, aur chole should not be too spicy, It's a healthy food. In fact, we did a so-called canteen challenge in Delhi, visiting schools, and we found the same samosa, notorious samosa being served in schools, came out to be a healthier option than burgers, in fact, because that samosa was just freshly fried as compared to other school canteens where it is being refried. So let's debunk certain theories, in fact, straight away, that it's also a methodology being used by the FBO that determines the value of that particular food. In fact, coming to the next point in terms of sustainability, the entire UNFSS conference this year was based on sustainability, and that's why when Dr. Jacob touched on this particular point, I was a part and parcel of that week-long discussion in UNFSS. It is important to understand that in India, the similar thing is happening. We do get locally grown food items made available to us for regional market, and that's why the mandis are existing everywhere. The transit from one mandi to another is rare, unless it is something very typical. For example, this is a mango season, and in Delhi, you won't find too many South Indian mangoes and too many West Indian Alfonsos. In fact, you will find what is grown in Northern India. In fact, so these are giving example that we practice sustainability without knowing what sustainability is. Of course, that's a different story altogether. The third important point is, if you want to actually come across a consumer's requirement in terms of his need for a particular type of food, let me tell you that the consumer would always prefer something which is a healthier option post-COVID. And now this is very important because the amount of successes that we have had in workshops and webinars post-COVID on issues of health and nutrition and basically countering a lot of things. It has got a wider audience. It is audience who have been through 2-hour seminars, workshops, 1.5 hours webinars. People have become conscious. I must compliment FSSAI for giving it a timely boost in terms of consumer understanding. Because the moment you talk about do a Google search, what were the most search words? We all know that because everybody is there in the media. Nutrition, food safety. I mean, food per se was, catching the attention of consumers. So post-pandemic, this is the right time to approach the consumers. They will understand things better. So coming to your last point in terms of comparison, which I said is apple to orange between packaged food and fresh foods. In fact, now packaged food is processed food and ultra-processed food. Now, obviously, that has got its inherent defects in it, which is incurable. Whereas unprocessed food or fresh foods, which is cooked and served to you, doesn't have that inherent defect of being ultra processed, high in salt, sugar, and saturated fat. Now, of course, we can assume that trans fat is not there. However, in fresh foods also, and this is where we come to the compliance part of it, the seller or the FBO basically is buying his ingredients from a list. As I have seen always, I have talked to many of them. Many of my friends are entrepreneurs, in fact, and they say that I've been buying for 20 years from so person, these spices, these oils, these whatever it is, in fact. So it's there's a belief system which exists that I'm getting something which is good for me. Of course, somebody wants to deliberately adulterate, we can't say anything about it, in fact. Similarly, for vegetables and fruits, in fact, they're getting it from farms from which they have been procuring for many, many years, in fact. Again, can we afford the FBO in case it is full of pesticides? We really can't, right? So certain exceptions have to be there, but otherwise, this is the right opportunity for us not to compare processed food with fresh foods, but treat them as two different trays. One can choose any of them. There's no old bar for them to choose. It is important for the consumer to understand that the fresh plate before him is more important. And let me tell you, I recently visited again an IIM campus, and it was a pleasure to look at the canteen there. In fact, in the cafeteria there, where there was considerable amount of crowd of students and teachers, in fact, towards the healthy food section. I'm not defining what the healthy food is. Now, this is a paradigm shift. I must say that we must continue our efforts to make consumers believe that pandemic is not over. It is not actually over. So we're not telling a lie. And carry on with your good eating habits. I think this should be an important factor for us, a positive factor that the consumers are now aware consumers as far as health and nutrition is concerned.
Way to kind of wrap up the questions, saying the pandemic has not ended. I know I hate, there was like 2 years where every time we were only talking about the pandemic and made me feel bad, but for a change, this does not feel so bad anymore. So although the pandemic has not ended, but I think we need to continue to using our good practices or good things that we learned from it, right? So there was a lot of bad stuff, but there are some good things that came out of the pandemic. I think care for your health, care for your food, and all of that was very integral part of it. And I think we should continue to follow that. So we have a barrage of questions. So I will go through the questions one by one. And let you folks answer. So there was one about fruit peels. I'll skip that. That's not relevant to the current topic. But there is one which talks about how do marriage functions and get-togethers and parties like that account for the labeling. So how should they label at marriage parties? Sanu, you want to answer that?
Well, they can put the menu in the invitation card with the nutritional, choices before. I mean, what analogy I can come is like when we take a long flight, from India to any other country. During the flight, I recollect the air hostess will come with a menu, and she will, before serving the food, and we are given the choice, which one would you like to have, whether it is you would like to have the Indian cuisine or the Oriental, or just with the diabetic food, etc. So maybe for large functions and things, it will be better. That can also be in the invitation card when you're sending. A small portion of this can also be added, and the consumer can make a RSVP telling their choice. And in that way, the food can also be, would not be wasted in the long run. So the organizer can customize the food accordingly, and there will be zero or minimal wastage of food. So I mean, this need to evolve. I'm just giving my personal opinion on that.
Anybody else would like to add?
I think we must all accept that these functions, etc., how many do we attend in a year, kind of a thing. So let's take that those are exceptional cases, in fact, and bypass them basically cajole ourselves with some, I would say, I can't call it bad food, in fact, but then non-nutritious food. But I'm quite sure every function will have something to do with nutrition and something to do with non-nutrition food. So let's bear with that for the time being.
Fair point. I think, yeah, hopefully we are not attending so many weddings. So it's okay not to have it leveled, but I'm sure we should give a shout out to all the wedding planners, saying here is something that you should consider, saying look at your menu, and they have the dress codes. I mean, a lot of them share saying the theme is like yellow or green and all of that. Why not the food menu? Absolutely. So that people come prepared. I know oftentimes I have found it hard going around the counters trying to figure out what all is available and trying to pick. I'm sure it will help them reduce the crowd as well, not just save the wastage on food, but also kind of reduce the crowd so people know exactly what to pick up from where and be done quickly. So these are all ideas I think you wedding planners can try out. There was another question, of course, not directly related to the topic, about labeling on tea and something about gold being mixed in the tea. I will answer that myself. I was running another conversation on World Tea Day a couple of months ago, I think the month before the last, and we talked about this, the gold in the tea, and everybody on the panel and all were tea experts said that it is quite useless. It does not add any value except to show it off. So yeah, gold in the tea is pretty useless, does not add any nutrition value to you. It doesn't dissolve, it doesn't go, it just goes wasted. The next question is from Krishna Gangaram Patil, and he's talking about keeping the food refrigerated. A lot of people keep it refrigerated, or I don't know if he means in the freezer, and they are worried about eating that food after 2 to 3 days. I'm assuming what he wants to know is this a valid concern, or is there something that we can tell them or provide guidance? My short answer, and I'll come back to the panelists, is that there is a certain time. So it's not just keeping the food in the fridge, it is also about when you keep it in the fridge, how far it has gone, etc., etc. So there are guidelines. We also try to do awareness around it, saying you should really put the food immediately into the fridge. So if you keep it immediately, it will last longer than if you keep it after 4 hours or after 8 hours. So it's not an absolute answer, but anything else that Dr. Sanu, you want to add, or Chef Prabhakar or Ashim ji?
Yeah, food, one must remember food has a life, because there is an invisible world which, is the pathogens. So as soon as you prepare the food, which is rich in nutrition, the pathogens get attracted, whether it is a yeast, a fungus, virus, bacteria. Now, certain pathogens like bacteria, which can get into the food, like listeria or salmonella or E. coli. If proper hygiene or sanitation is not maintained, then there are high chances that they can enter upon, even through the factory worker who is unhygienic or who is having some disease. That can also get transmitted into the food. So as a precaution, any food science always suggests you go with the policy of, technology of preservation, or cold storage, or, warming it up, pasteurization or sterilization. I mean, so there are different ways and means. Now, in terms of refrigeration, yes, it will definitely, certain microorganisms, they cannot thrive in low temperature. So you can inhibit their growth, and you can save the food for some time, because once you are keeping it in refrigeration and taking it out, and then you're warming it, then you are again following pasteurization or sterilization. But what I would advise as a food technologist, not from the regulatory perspective, but as a food technologist, when you keep it in the fridge, don't take the entire food immediately and warm it. Maybe you can take a portion of it, what is required for you to eat, and just warm that particular food and eat it, and keep the remaining food in the fridge itself, because any temperature fluctuation, that if the temperature, it comes from 0 degree or minus 18 degree in terms of refrigerated freezer condition. Once it comes to 0 degree or 4 degrees, again, there are chances the microorganism can get into it, especially listeria. I'm talking specifically of listeria, which can thrive in cold temperatures. So, sufficient precautions has to be taken. You have to apply the food science when you're adopting such practices, and it varies from food to food. The same technology cannot be applied. What you are doing it for curd or milk, you cannot apply it for some other food. So based on the food type, you need to evolve your technology and do the freezing.
Great. Anybody would like to add?
No, I think it's well answered.
Great. There is some question from Shilpasri Karanam, and he wants a food business idea for Dubai. Of course, I don't think we'll be able to help him with that. The next question is on the concept of food distribution. So there is, so this question is from Harish Balaji Rao. So there is the concept of Annadana, which is distribution of food. So you prepare food and distribute it to people. Now, the question is really, does the display regulation affect that? How does it, how are we supposed to handle that? So I think this is for voluntary donation foods.
So they are answering it very briefly, and Dr. Sanu can actually expand on it. FSSAI has a program, running program in terms of the prasadam that is given, or the bhog that is given in the temples, in fact, the major temples. In fact. So there is a process and a procedure followed there when they get certified by FSSAI. Of course, this is for large gatherings. So, I mean, there are ways and means of ensuring that the food is healthy. Of course, the Labeling Act will not apply to this kind of a temporary arrangement. In fact, nobody will take a license or do a registration for that. So it is self-care as far as I'm concerned, and for reference, you can always visit FSSAI website and see how they're managing the prasadam and the bhog in various temples across the country.
Dr. Sanu, you want to add anything?
I'll add like bhog is blissful hygienic offering to God. That's the acronym. Of course, it is for a large gathering in the temple premises. Whenever they have, it is someone donates the food or it's a community kitchen, langar kind of a thing where the food is prepared and as an offering, it is going back to the people. So what in the bhog we emphasize is it should be hygiene. Temple is something sanctum, very, very, very holy. So we need to also give that kind of consideration that the food should also be sanctified or should be holy enough to feed the people. Now, for small kind of a donation which comes not as part of bhog but from elsewhere, the person who receives the food, they can also do a preliminary lab testing. Which for calorific values and all those things, it's a nominal charge. It doesn't add on cost. So random checks, not every time, but random checks. If it is a regular supplier, once in a while it is fine. But if it is coming from various supplier, check, I would suggest to have it to see whether it is all good, nutritionally good, and also they can also do the safety checks for pesticide or heavy metals or microbiological contamination. That will be very rare, but just to clear their doubts or whatever this thing is there, laboratory testing is a science-based method which no one can argue, which no one can reject or say that this is wrong. So it's a good practice for anyone who wants to before taking the food, give it for a laboratory test. If it is coming to an orphanage, someone is donating. So once in a while, such kind of practices can be done.
So if I were to kind of summarize, so the regulation itself does not apply if it is coming from a non-institutional setup. If it's an institutional setup, then it depends on the type of the institute. So if it's at a temple, then there is bhog provision. If it is like we have the food recovery program, right? So in which the institute that is donating will sort of ensure that at the time of handover, the food is safe for consumption. And that's what they're responsible for. And then, of course, if the supply chain, if it's a more consistent system of receiving food, then I think putting some checks and balance kind of makes sense. Moving on to the next question, which is...
Ramesh, I will have to unfortunately leave because another call in waiting in fact. So thank you everybody and thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ashim. So great. Thank you for your time. And the last question, I'll promise, so I know I exceeded my time, but I usually tend to do that, is the question on analysis. So this question is from Tanvi, and it says, are you saying that manually calculating it from NIN is enough and we don't need to do lab analysis? I think that question was answered during the conversation, that you don't need to send it to a lab. Doing manual calculations from NIN is sort of enough as long as it meets the requirements. So with that, I think we are almost at the end of our time and also end of our questions. And before we kind of wrap up, of course, Mr. Sanyal had to leave another meeting, but we'll give just a quick wrap up. So 1 minute to you, Dr. Sanu. I know you were also supposed to leave, but you've been courteous enough to be around for a longer time. So just a last 1 minute wrap up, not random, wrap up.
I mean, the last minute, what I would say is already written on the backside. I am seeing a message, push yourself.
Wow. You can actually read it.
Push yourself because no one else, it's you who have to take up. So I'll go with that message. And just 3 days back, we had the World Emoji Celebration Day or something which I was seeing. So we should have a smiley face, and embrace the regulations as and when it comes forward. It is not, it is correcting or mending the behavior and trying to, bring it in a proper way. I give always the analogy, like if there was no traffic light or traffic signals, then things would have been, accidents or traffic jams, all those things, challenges would have come. But being there is a traffic light signals and a policeman, everything is systematic. There is no problem of traffic jam or accidents or so on. So likewise are the food regulations. You have to take in that sense. Regulations are not something, harming one person. This is, I said in the beginning, one-time pain and full-time gain. Later on, there will be a full-time gain. So think in that aspect and go forward. Thank you. And be smiley, smile and embrace the regulations as and when it comes forward. That's my message.
Right, Prabhakar, your last thoughts?
Yeah, it was nice to be a part of this. And from my side, I would say that, accepting changes is something which, as a human being, you need to incorporate into your life cycle. And, anybody who is trying to do a business always deal with ethical practices which has to be followed, so that, you are human and you are treating another human in par with you. So that's, if you have these values in life, I think definitely we will be able to accept and acknowledge all those things. Well, it's all for the betterment. So let us always take it as a betterment and start, accepting it and keep changing ourselves. And I would say that it's not about changing; it's about upgrading ourselves. Like every time they have this iPhone which keeps sending us notifications saying that we have to upgrade it. We have to upgrade ourselves as far as the knowledge is also concerned. So when we have an opportunity like this, let us take it and start accepting it and keep moving. And it is betterment. So I would always say that change is always going to be constant. So we need to accept it and go with it and be real. I don't have to be putting a face in front of it, which is not real to you.
Fantastic. That's, I think, a good way to put it. I think let's treat it as an upgrade. We do that with our phones. We should do that with our businesses. We should do that with our food. So we should continue to do our upgrade. You could call it innovation, you could call it upgrade, but we should continue to kind of improvise on whatever we are doing so that tomorrow is better than today. I think with that message, I will kind of want to wrap this up. So it was a fantastic conversation, very honest and candid. I think that's the thing that we like about our conversation is we've always found that the panelists have been very, very candid. So this one was another one of that. It's been very insightful. A lot of things learned, shared. Hopefully the audience that tuned in are going to use some of these tips. We've clarified some questions. I want to take this time to thank Dr. Sanu, Prabhakar, Mr. Ashim Sanyal. Of course, he had to leave. Not early, I won't blame him. I overran, but he had to leave. But he's been very, very graceful, accepting our invitation and coming here to talk with us, and fantastic work that he has been doing. And as we wrap up a little bit about ourselves, once again, we are a compliance regulatory food consulting company, and we care about food and we want to keep it safe for human consumption. So we help our customers design, implement standards, and also help them with regulatory compliances, both national and international standards. This is the Food Safety Conversation is our monthly webinar series where we share knowledge from practitioners. So we like to keep it real, right? Like Prabhakar said, no fake faces. We like to keep it real with real people and real issues. All our past conversations are available on our YouTube channel. There's also a link from our webpage. If you have any feedback, please do share it at feedback@foodsafetyworks.in. If there are topics that you would want us to talk about, please send them to us at the same email ID. Of course, we are there on social media and all our channels, so you can register or subscribe to us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter. Our handle is the same. Food Safety Works is what it is called. And you can also, if you're on YouTube, subscribe to our channel, like everybody else says, so that you get updates whenever we have a new video uploaded. As a company, we are committed to sharing knowledge and providing end-to-end solutions for food safety. So we conduct online trainings for various topics, FOSTAC, which are the mandatory training from FSSAI. We also have an app which you can download from Play Store, which will keep you updated on news as well as our trainings. So this week we are doing a special masterclass on meat safety, so food safety in meat processing. So we are doing that, and a lot of interesting stuff going on. So a lot of changes. So stay tuned, and you can also subscribe to our newsletter from our website. There is a link. And before we go, thank you once again, and have a great rest of the day. And thank you once again, Dr. Sanu and Prabhakar.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye.